The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, good morning. This is Kathleen Gaffney with the IEA. We're getting ready to start the webinar. We're going to give it just 1 or 2 more minutes. There's still people joining, so give us a minute and we'll start soon. Thanks. Good afternoon, good morning. Again, this is Kathleen Gaffney from the IEA, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. We're going to hear from 2 of my colleagues, Jessica Glicker and Jacob Finley. They're going to present the results from data collection and analysis efforts targeting the ESCO markets globally. And before we start, I just wanted to say a special thank you to those of you on the phone. I think there are a number of you on the webinar today who participated in this data collection effort, as well as subsequent discussions to help get clarifications and review some of the individual country results. So once again, thank you very much for your support and your contributions, making this analysis a truly global resource on ESCO markets. And we hope that it will only improve in the future as we continue to build it out on the website. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jessica and Jake.
Hi, this is Jessica, and welcome to the Global ESCO Market Update webinar. First, a brief outline of what we'll go over today. We'll start with a short discussion and background context regarding investment needs for energy efficiency to obtain the Sustainable Development Scenario. This will be followed by a short overview of financing models for energy efficiency and where ESCOs and energy performance contracts fit in the wider context. Then we'll provide a brief outline on the ESCO Association survey we conducted in 2018, as well as the key findings from this research, with a short focus on 2 of the main ESCO markets, China and the US. And finally, we will do a short tour of where all this information will live on the IEA website. So first, to provide an overview of the role that energy efficiency plays in the IEA's energy outlook. This graph was first presented in the World Energy Outlook 2012, but is still used for our current scenarios and quantifies the opportunity for policies and measures to realize the potential of all known energy efficiency measures that are economically viable. As you can see, energy efficiency plays a large role in obtaining the IEA's Sustainable Development Scenario. However, without increased investment, the potential energy efficiency gains presented by the Efficient World Scenario will not be realized. To realize this potential, the average annual investment must grow to USD 584 billion between now and 2025, and then nearly to 1.3 trillion per year between 2026 and 2040. This means annual investment will need to double between now and 2025, and then double again between 2026 and 2040. So now we'll have a look at some of the primary available financing models to increase investment. So overall, there are many options available for financing energy efficiency measures. Here are some arranged from commercial to public options. Of course, all these mechanisms are nuanced and can move within a market. And it is also important to note that what's missing here is personal investment. So people using their own funds to buy appliances or otherwise invest in energy efficiency. The IEA's annual energy efficiency market report tracks the size of the ESCO market. In 2018, we decided to take this research a step further and conducted a survey of over 25 national ESCO associations to inform a more in-depth analysis of the global ESCO market. And as Kathleen mentioned, many of you are on the call today, so thank you again for your contribution. The survey covered ESCO financing models, energy performance contracting, and related policy measures. It is important to note that we are focusing primarily on energy performance contracting, so the majority of our work refers to specifically to EPCs, and therefore having a look at guaranteed and shared savings models. Overall, the survey covers 80% of the major emerging economies: Brazil, China, India, Mexico, and South Africa, and Indonesia will be uploaded soon, and 80% of the G20 and 60% of IEA membership. In addition, the ESCO survey results online include data from the Joint Research Center, the 2017 European level ESCO market report with data from 2014 to 2016, and quality work funded by the EU's Horizon 2020 program, with further insight into the European level ESCO market drivers and barriers. So now on to some of our key findings. The ESCO market continues to grow steadily. The global value of the ESCO market by EPC revenue was $28.6 billion USD in 2017, which was an 8% increase from just over $26 billion in 2016. A lot of this growth is occurring in China, which is by far the largest market globally. Now having a look at which end-use sectors ESCOs typically operate in on the global level. When looking at the market by end-use sector, the market is relatively evenly split between industry and the non-industrial and the non-residential building sector. The strong presence of non-residential building projects is linked to the long-term versus short-term thinking of building owners. Public sector customers have long payback horizons and use ESCO projects to supply capital for neglected building maintenance and building modernization. Privately owned commercial buildings, particularly rental buildings, generally will not implement long payback projects. They look for quick payback through the implementation of single technology projects such as lighting or control upgrades. Therefore, the commercial rental buildings are not a target customer base for ESCOs in general. And it's also important to note here that there's virtually zero activity in the transport sector. Now moving on to the most common forms of ESCO contracts. Overall, guaranteed savings dominate the market. However, there is a correlation between contract type and region. In well-developed ESCO markets, which are generally larger and therefore account for more of the market, with very developed financial systems that are used to financing energy efficiency projects, guaranteed savings are more popular. For example, this can be seen in China, the United States, Korea, and the European Union. Shared savings is popular in emerging economies with younger ESCO markets, such as in India, Chile, and to a certain extent, China. However, it's important to note that many emerging ESCO markets may not yet have associations, and yet were not covered in the survey. This split is largely attributed to the ESCO's ability to finance the project and which entity will be assuming the financial risk of the project. In terms of what type of organizations are engaging ESCOs, we have more. The US, the European Union, and Canada are all driven by ESCO activity in the public sector. However, some of the biggest emerging markets, including China, India, and Mexico, are predominantly private. A lot of this is dependent on local government legislation, which can sway whether projects make more sense financially, legally, or whatever metric is used to carry out public sector or private sector engagement by ESCO engagement. Legislation and incentives also heavily influence how easy or difficult it is to engage in an energy performance contract. So now we're going to have a look at two of the key main markets, China and the United States.
Hey, I'm Jacob Finley, and I'm here to discuss the Chinese and the United States ESCO markets, and then I'll take you to the ESCO website. China composes 60% of the global ESCO market and has shown continued growth for over a decade. In 2011, the ESCO market received a boost from the 12th five-year plan, which set a target for 16% reduction of energy intensity. The government encouraged private industry to contribute to this goal by exempting ESCOs from corporate income tax for 3 years, and then a 50% reduction in corporate income tax the following 3 years. They were also exempt from sales tax VAT, and the government provided clarification that ESCO projects could receive subsidies from both central and local governments. Additionally, the government created accounting systems which allowed for commercial banks to treat energy performance contracting revenue as a part of the security for energy efficiency loans, which essentially allows ESCOs to maintain a larger line of credit to complete more energy efficiency improvement projects. On this slide, we can see a breakdown of the sectors of the contracts that the Chinese ESCO market uses. You can see that China operates within the industrial and the non-residential sector, and this is mostly in the private sector. This is due to the types of policies that the Chinese government promotes and the industrial business owners' willingness to contract out energy efficiency projects. When they're contracting out these projects, there's a split between the two types of contracts used, a pretty even split between shared savings and guaranteed savings. So moving on to the US market, we can see in the first two graphs that the market is driven by the public sector in contrast to the private sector in China. And the federal government, state government, and K through 12 schools, all public projects, constitute the majority of this ESCO work. The breakdown is due to, again, incentives and policies enacted to encourage the retrofitting of inefficient government buildings. The benefits of these policies are a lowering of credit risk to financial institutions for financing energy efficiency improvements in government buildings. Additionally, federal projects do not have to sign a debt agreement, which makes engaging with EPC projects more desirable. And then looking at the third graph, we see that nearly all of the contracts used for this work is guaranteed savings. So without getting into the nitty-gritty, the US has a much longer history with performance contracting and therefore has developed several variations in the types of contracts employed. For example, energy performance contracts in the US are often referred to as energy savings performance contracts, especially for federal usage. For a more detailed analysis of each country, we can visit the website, and we'll do that now. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see the website. And here the website is split into 4 sections. On the ESCO home, we have an overview of the ESCO market activity, including size, growth, contracts used, and sectors operated within. Next, we move to the ESCO contracts. Here we have an overview of the types of contracts, including guaranteed savings and shared savings, as well as the options for technical and credit risk insurance. And then next is a link for our country profiles. So each of the country pages can be accessed here. And then moving on to resources. Here we have a host of information that we've used to compile this website, as well as just additional ESCO information. If you have any information that you would like to be hosted here, please send us a link in the comments or feel free to email us. We'd love to host it here. And moving on to our next steps looking forward, we are hopefully going to provide an overview of the financing options for energy efficiency in a similar way that we've done with energy service companies here. So that ranking of commercial to public, that scale, we hope to have a breakout for each of those different financing options. Additionally, we'd like to make this website easier to compare countries, especially the top dashboard information that we see when we visit a country page, and then provide a continual update of ESCO market analysis and resources. So do this survey annually and with a possible collaboration with the Joint Research Center, and expand to other countries that we don't have covered here. And then finally, provide an in-depth analysis and policy recommendations for each of these countries.
Great. Well, thanks, Jessica and Jake. So wetlands, that was a quick overview of all the deep and broad content that we have on the website. So that leaves a lot of time for questions. I should have said at the beginning, we're able to take your questions through the chat function on the website. So please use that to ask us some questions, or if you're on the call and you just want to make a comment about some of the data you provided or clarify some of the data you provided, that's more than welcome as well. So I think while we wait for the questions to come, I was just going to ask Jesse, do you think, or what's the plan for updating this for 2019? Are we asking countries to volunteer information? Are we going to do a survey again? What's the plan for the update?
I think the plan currently is that we're going to continue to update the information as it becomes available on a country-by-country basis, since a lot of the associations we spoke with don't necessarily run annual updates. However, some is available annually. And in that way, we'll stay in touch with all of the association members we spoke with to continually update this data, as well as any other countries that we want to further provide data for or include in this, because we understand this is not a comprehensive list.
Yeah. And is there any plan to expand the types of data that we've collected? Maybe working with JRC to get more consistency between the two surveys? Yeah, can you maybe talk a little bit about what we weren't able to cover that maybe we could do a better job next time?
Definitely. I think we're hoping to be able to cover more of the market size. Eventually, it would be great to go into supply contracting. As I mentioned at the start, this is largely just energy performance contracting, and definitely developing consistency as we continue to maintain this data to make sure that we're definitions remain consistent between the countries. And JRC does a terrific job with their reports, and so looking to align among the other surveys and data collection that is currently happening.
Great. Okay, good. I'm starting to see some questions come over. So we'll take the first one, which is pretty broad. So yeah, I mean, can you speak a little bit about the most common barriers that were identified to developing energy efficiency in ESCO markets?
Sure. This is a simple question. No, it's a great question. So we break up each country page with the individual barriers that that country is facing. But in general, there's a lot of, so if you look, I'm scrolling, if you're still in the webinar, to China, the Chinese barrier section. So there are a lot of commonality, there's a lot of commonality between the barriers that exist despite regional variation. A lot of it is having legislation and financing policy that enables the ESCO market, that things that enable the counting of EPCs off balance sheet, so that it isn't included in increasing the debt and the risk of a individual company. That's one major thing, and that's something that we've recently seen a clarification of the Eurostat guidelines toward the end of 2016 or 2017, I believe. And so we'll see how that's affected the market and hopefully grown the market. And the US has been continually updating their principles and their policies that affect the ESCO market, and that has definitely helped the growth of the ESCO market. And one of the main barriers overall, especially, is financing options and clarifying EPCs between the customer and the ESCO.
Great. So a couple of comments. There was a comment made that it was great to see that the IEA web information, to see the information by country and that updates could be made by country, which is really useful to see, as well as the ESCO market as a whole. And the hope there is that the comment was that we hope that that could be developed even more in depth, and I think that's the plan. And then there was another comment, question actually, a gentleman from the UAE asking whether there was plan to expand the coverage in the Middle East.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great question, and to address both of them, we would definitely like to go more in depth with all of this, and eventually add on a recommendation section to all of these countries, and that's something that we're currently developing. In terms of expanding coverage in the Middle East, that's something we're very interested in doing, and I think for now, this is a bit of a open call. If there are people who know of information available or the right contact person, would be very interested in getting in touch so that we can collect more data, because we would like to have this be as close to fully global coverage as possible.
Great. Another question was, any idea of the total number of ESCOs that exist globally? So
that is a great question. We have a breakdown by country, so that is one of the things that we focused on, is how many ESCOs on average, or how many ESCOs there are within a country. We have not compiled a global number for that. There's one very important distinction that we discuss on the main page of the site, or maybe it's in the ESCO contract section, the difference between a subsidiary and a standalone ESCO, which influences a lot of how many ESCOs are operating in the region. Some regions are dominated by some of the larger organizations, technology providers that have smaller subsidiary branches that are acting as an ESCO. So no, but we can definitely add that number that we've collected from the individual countries. That would be a very interesting thing to see.
Another comment, hoping to get some specific data and information up on the web about for the country of Turkey. So if there's anyone out there that can help with that, I think that's another gap, that we don't have a good resource for that country. Is that right?
Yes, definitely. We'd be very interested to do more on the Turkish market.
There was a question. There was a question a little earlier, and it was about trends such as energy as a service. She said they said it looked like the survey also asked about energy as a service or energy service agreements. Can you say a little bit about trends in that, whether there's experiencing any kind of real growth, or is it just still is it limited to certain markets?
Yep, energy service agreements are definitely growing. There are some very developed markets. So Germany is a great example of that. There's a very, very large market for energy services, and I think EPCs are a very small component of that. China is definitely moving into energy supply agreements or energy supply contracts. So I think those are two good examples, but growth has been slow, and I think it's largely regional at the moment.
Yeah. There's another comment or question about the usefulness of the Quality European Market Report. The choice of EU countries was the choice of EU countries for the IEA survey based on the countries analyzed by Quality. This question comes from a partner in the Quality project. So yes, we're very happy that we have you on the phone, and we're very happy to be able to use the data. So how did that work this time, and how might it work going forward?
The quality information was really useful to identify barriers and drivers in the European market. So, I mean, yeah, it was really in depth, the survey responses and the ability to compare what was preventing an ESCO market from developing in one country versus another, and then look at the policies that are being enacted in one country versus another, was a great comparison tool that was definitely facilitated by the information collected by Quality. So thank you so much for collecting that.
And definitely in terms of not duplicating any work that had already been done, we very much looked to incorporating the Quality data so that, you know, we were being consistent and really sort of aligning what was already out there. So thank you.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think the next commenter said that it would be interesting to see a comparison of ESCO businesses from country to country, different business models, market segments, kind of more of a benchmarking than an insight. And that would be able to, you know, that would help improve the market and business side of ESCOs. And I think the more we can, I would say the more we can get the data collection to be consistent, then that would be the goal, is to have that kind of comparison. I think that's what you're alluding to earlier with that comparison tool.
Yep, yeah, we're definitely aiming to be able to do a country comparator so that you can click and see what barriers exist in China versus the US versus Mexico, to really be able to do a comparison and not have to click between the pages.
Yeah. I think, Jake, you mentioned that another next step was to do more and showcase more of the IEA's work on policy. So, you know, analyzing and creating recommendations, policy recommendations that would, you know, help with the market for the ESCO market. So there was one specific comment here, a question about whether or not that work could help, you know, foster and stimulate the super ESCO market. So maybe first, what do we mean by a super ESCO, Jess, and what kinds of policies can governments put in place to bring that about?
Yes, definitely. So we do have a section on the website under ESCO contracts where we discuss super ESCOs. And there's some very good examples out there. I think the UAE is up and with a super ESCO, and same with India. In terms of policy to help stimulate the use of a super ESCO in underdeveloped markets, I think it's definitely setting aside funds to be able to facilitate a super ESCO. Super ESCOs largely connect contractors and ESCOs with the customer, and they really do provide a lot of the training. So I think understanding best practices and really a lot of understanding what's happening in other markets. So super ESCOs, almost helping super ESCOs in other countries would be one great way to stimulate an underdeveloped ESCO market.
Do super ESCOs provide a framework for things like accreditation of participating ESCOs? Do they, you mentioned training, so do they develop, you know, measurement and verification?
Yes, they can do that. So a lot of times they can do the certifications for certain ESCOs, and that way there's a level of trustworthiness between what kind of ESCOs are being engaged. This is especially useful in markets where there might be a lack of trust because there aren't well-established best practices, and there's a lack of information on what ESCOs are able to provide.
Great. There's a question about the European ESCO market in particular, and questioning if or noting that it's relatively underdeveloped. So are there efficiency improvements in Europe that are mostly promoted by government regulations? I think the question there is, yeah, what is it about the European market that in the context of the ESCO business? Is it underdeveloped? I guess that's the question.
It's a relatively small market, especially when you're comparing it with the U.S. and China. So if you're still on the webinar slides, you can sort of see the European Union is there in light green. And that's true. It is younger than the U.S. market and certainly smaller than the Chinese market. And I think a lot of that is contributed to the fact that the nature of the projects is certainly smaller. We're seeing small scale projects happening, smaller improvements need to be made, whereas in the Chinese market, we've got very large projects being undertaken. And in the US, it's largely driven by the government buildings sector. And so that plays a big role.
Yeah. I think we weren't able to really integrate these ESCO results to the sort of the other work that the Energy Efficiency Division within IEA is working on, this sort of digitalization theme. I don't know if anybody on the phone was on one of our recent webinars where we kicked off our work program where we're trying to do research and analysis on the benefits of digitalization from both, improving the gains we can get from energy efficiency, but also the ability to use digital tools to track how much energy savings we're getting. So I think there's a question here about how does digitalization aid in ESCO market development, and I do think that would be that's a connection that we're going to be making this year. But do you, Jeff, do you have a sense of what are the key aspects of digitalization that are going to aid in ESCO market development?
Yeah, absolutely. So measurement and verification will continue to be of big use to growing the ESCO market. Things like smart contracts is a great way of measuring the savings, because that is something often the guaranteed savings and the shared savings aspect of energy performance contracts is often up for debate quite often, and that's one thing that people don't quite trust. So enabling smart contracting will definitely be one way to improve trust within the industry.
And then there's a question about the main barriers to the use of ESCOs within the sort of context of transport energy efficiency. And I'm wondering if you had some thoughts on that. That's a good question. We did make a remark that there's no activity there, but any thoughts on why that might be, or whether it could change?
I think a lot of it is due to the small scale investment needs that are happening when you're looking at investment in individual vehicles. There is apparently some work happening with electric buses and ESCOs trying to operate in that space. But so far, I think the majority of ESCO work and the technical capabilities of ESCOs has really been focused in industry and in buildings. I think the lack of technical expertise happening for ESCOs in transport is very important there as to a main barrier.
Mm-hmm. There's another question about the statement I think we made about the EU market being young. But I think they're also wondering here if there's market or legal or policy barriers as well. I think you touched on that a little bit, but.
Yep, so there's an important policy clarification that's happened recently within the past 2 years, the Eurostat clarification guidelines that were issued, and that was in an attempt to stimulate and grow the size of the European market. And so it'll be very interesting, and we will definitely track it on the website to see how that has changed the market. And without getting too technical, that was a different way of accounting for ESCO or EPC contracts for the balance sheet of whoever's taken on the financial risk or the financial burden. So that should hopefully open up the market a little bit, and that'll be something very interesting for us to watch.
Yeah, I think there was definitely when we first got some of the survey results back, there was definitely some mention of that. Let's see. Another question here is, I think this is a good one, something we could take on board here at the IEA. Says, what do you think about standardizing the approach, meaning the procedures that go with making ESCO contracts, ESCO programs, or something underneath, sort of super ESCOs, sort of these types of standardization. It says most of the newcomers to the concept are making the same mistakes and are learning too late from the mistakes of others. And I think that you mentioned earlier that the super ESCO can be a leading by example to other super ESCOs, but also there's intra-ESCO learning, I guess, or inter-ESCO learning. So how do you think the IEA might be able to get involved with this, or are there other forums out there that are addressing this so that we don't make the same mistakes?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's twofold. I think that the IEA and this area in particular can definitely be a place to host best practices. If we were sort of put a success story in the Canadian example, and so incorporating more of this, if you know of good examples to use for certain countries as a place to go and look for best practices. Things like standardized contracts or even just standardized definitions. I think that this will be a great place for those resources to live. And then in terms of looking at knowledge sharing between ESCO associations, I think ESCO associations play a really large role here in terms of understanding what's happening in the market, being able to understand and even lobby for what policy is needed. I would highlight here the United States. The ESCO Association of the United States is very active, and they have great resources for what is an ESCO, what are these types of contracts. So things like that, the ESCO Association play a large role, and I think we're trying to do something similar, but on the global level.
Good. Yeah, definitely open to additional suggestions there. I think the more we can help, share that information via our web resources, or perhaps convene meetings and workshops in regions or here in Paris. I think we'd be really happy to be part of that process. There's a question here. Could you please share your opinion on Baltic countries, so Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and the development of ESCOs in those regions? It says, as in these countries, it's difficult, and at the moment they're finding it hard to compete with other ways of doing energy efficiency projects, in particular multifamily apartment renovations is mentioned. So do you have any evidence or do we have any insights on that region?
Yeah, and I think that region in particular definitely has some improvements happening, and that's very interesting to see. Just in the past couple of years, there are some specific funds that have been set up to help aid the ESCO market, which I think is going to be central to increasing the size of those markets. In terms of competing with with other forms of innovation for multifamily house projects, I think that's an issue that's been happening globally. And I'd say it would be important to look at some other markets that have strong residential sector ESCO activity. So I'm trying to think of some examples happening there. I would look in Germany for that, the UK for that, and so other small scale examples happening within the EU.
Yeah, I think that was what I personally was at a conference last year in Poland, and there's a whole track on financing in Central and Eastern Europe, and it was there are a lot of different financing models going on there. So maybe it is a little tough to compete, perhaps. I don't know. There's a lot of public money just as well, so it's a little hard for these commercial models to rise.
And
yeah.
I think a lot of that also will be establishing the market, maybe going into the commercial sector and when working in hospitals, public buildings, schools, and really establishing the market, and then expanding once ESCOs there have sort of gained the trust of the market and developed a little bit further.
And it could be something that the policies start to enable by requiring it to be more public-private, and also it could be a requirement on the use of public funds, that there's some sort of that type of contracting model is preferred. Okay, another question, I think is a good one. So question about the residential sector. So while the residential sector is a large consumer of energy, there doesn't seem to be a lot of activity, or it's got its own challenges. So is there anything on the residential sector that would make it grow or become more of a player in this part of the market? And is the IEA interested in looking at the reasons why we haven't had too much activity in red sector?
Yeah, I think this one, again, goes back to the small-scale nature of the projects and really standardizing contracts. So I'd highlight here in the United States, the PACE program, really working in the residential sector to standardize projects, to standardize contracts, and therefore it's easier for them to access financing once the ESCO market, they're able to use ESCOs and contractors to continue using standardized contracts and therefore access more financing. So I think that's a very good example looking at that, and that's now underway and under development in the EU, and I believe in China and Canada as well, and Australia as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add, when some years ago, maybe decades ago, in the US, there was an attempt to roll out standardized performance contracts in the residential sector, and sort of at the pilot stage it went well, but then they could never make it scale. But now I'm seeing that more performance-based contracting in general is being made possible through advancements in technology and measurement and verification. Smart contracts are starting to become more of the thing, and so maybe we might start to see the residential market come back online in some kind of a performance basis. It might not be the same ESCO model that you would run for a commercial property, but it would at least be based on the same principles of performance and guaranteeing a certain amount of savings, cash flow, and that sort of thing. So it could come back under a different name. So comment here, it would be good for the IEA to reference the different conferences that are going on and dedicated to ESCOs, the different events around the world that are happening. I know there is one coming up in India, and there was just one in China. So maybe give an overview of the kind of global footprint.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be a great thing for us to include. Maybe in the resources section, we can add an events component, because as Kathleen mentioned, there's one in early March in India, and that's an international conference. And there will be more throughout the year, and hopefully maybe at the IEA.
Yeah, and I think if there's folks out there that are interested in putting on, having a forum or pulling more of a global gathering, definitely let us know. I think that's the next step we'd like to take, is to convene sort of all the key players, whether they're the associations or the individual ESCOs that are leading in a given region, kind of bring it all together under one kind of global umbrella, so that there really is true learnings and comparison going on.
And that harks back nicely to something that was brought up earlier in terms of the knowledge sharing. We try to make as many links as possible in terms of what's happening in one country that could potentially be adopted and used in another country. For instance, the energy savings insurance that's happening only in certain regions would be very interesting, to link people and knowledge share that way. So we're hoping to, through the website and through the individual country pages, be able to link up and do a knowledge sharing exchange.
Yeah. So there were a lot of questions coming in fast and furious, but it's sort of stalled out. We have a few more minutes left. I want to give folks an opportunity to ask more questions before we close. And maybe, so I'll just wait. I think one question is being developed. Someone's typing.
And if you have additional questions, you can always send them into energyefficiency@iea.org. Comment.
Maybe show the link to the website again.
Yes, the link to the website.
Although you can probably read the URL.
Oh yeah, the URL up here. Can
we go back to that page? Yeah. Yeah, there we go. So I think too, as everything, there's room for improvement. So those of you who made contributions to the survey, please take a look at the website. We're happy to add more nuance to some of the sort of global statements that we were making with some of the data. We're happy to add more specifics for a particular country. And those of you who weren't involved with the survey but would like to present your, information on behalf of your country or your company, there's room for that. So definitely get in touch with Jeff. Okay, a couple of questions just came in. Thanks. One of them is, do we see any jumps or expansions in the ESCO market size when the government announces a new future efficiency target? That's a great question.
That is a great question. And I think if you look in the policy sections of the individual countries, that's highlighted there. Certainly in China, that has definitely made a big impact on the market in terms of market growth. In speaking with the Chinese ESCO Association, they definitely cite having a strong efficiency target as a main driver for the Chinese ESCO market. I think it's a little bit still too soon to tell in terms of this Eurostat clarification for the European market, but that definitely, you know, sort of in terms of all the individual markets, has led to a lot of positive feelings. And I think the same is true also in some of Southeast Asia in terms of new policy that's being established there and the correlation with growing the ESCO market and making it easier for ESCOs to engage with customers in energy performance contracts. So definitely, I think there is quite a correlation.
Yeah. So any comment? There's a question here. What about the Italian market? Question mark. So do you have some insights there, Jeff?
I would have to refresh myself on the Italian market, but there is a great page on the size of the Italian market, or and what's happening in the Italian market.
We have Italy
but
covered.
Italy is covered. Italy is up there.
Okay. Let's see. So do we have, there's a question about the ability of ESCOs to obtain debt. Are there any observations or any comments for that question?
Definitely, and this is something that is largely linked to the specific regional policies that are set up for ESCOs in order to take out debt. And this is something also that relates back to what kind of contract they'll be choosing, whether it's an energy savings contract or a shared savings contract or a guaranteed savings contract. In some markets, it is a lot harder for ESCOs to take on debt, and they often cannot be involved in more than one project if they're financing that project because of they've maxed out their debt or they don't have an established credit line. And so this is something that's very important, is legislation that enables ESCOs to operate without taking on more debt and operate off balance sheet. In the United States, it's often an operating lease, which protects the ESCO from taking on too much debt. And so I think that's largely regional, but a very important factor in terms of how much an ESCO can operate.
Okay, good. Got a few more minutes. And one more question. Any examples of innovative ESCO financing? I guess define innovative, but yeah, any sort of...
There are a couple of good examples. I would say definitely if you look at the energy efficiency market report, we highlight a few examples. There have been, especially in terms of public lighting projects, bundling projects, and being able to finance them that way, moving away from that's sort of been innovated for the past couple of years, and now moving that from this small scale lighting and into larger projects will definitely, I think, be a very positive thing for the market. Also, energy savings insurance. This has happened in a few markets, in particular in the UK market, I believe also in some of South America. And so this is the ability for, it can be a financial institution, a private company, or an insurance provider to provide insurance for a project. And this way, ESCOs are able to engage a lot more with customers and withdraw and take out debt from a financial institution if they have that energy savings insurance. So that largely can aid the size of the market because, and this is back to some of the main barriers, there's a lot of perceived risk associated with energy efficiency projects, and energy savings insurance can definitely help change that.
Good. All right. Well, looks like we're almost out of time, and I think I haven't seen a question pop up. Oh, here comes one. Would be so someone's just commenting that they would be interested in seminars or training weeks organized in their particular region. So definitely take that comment on board. I know the IEA implements training in certain regions, including the Baltics, which was mentioned, and so maybe that's something we can talk to the implementers of that training to see if that financing and ESCO, ESCOs in particular, could be introduced in the training concept, in the training program.
Definitely, yep.
Okay. Okay, well, I saw just, unless do you guys want to make any final comments? Otherwise, I'll let everybody get back to work.
No, I think that's it. Unless. All right. No, thank you guys for listening.
Yep, thanks everyone, and check out the website. You see the link online, and if you have any comments or want to make any additions, you can reach out to us at energy.efficiency@iea.org or contact Jesse directly. Thanks again, and have a great day. Bye-bye.